everybody. This is Carolina Millan today with another podcast episode of Beyond the Hustle. And today we have a special guest, Mr. Mark Metry. Hey, Mark, how are you?
I could not be better. Thank you so much for having me on. It was just yesterday that I used to, watch your videos online on how to build my own brand. And here I am on your podcast. So it's such a pleasure.
Love it. Thank you. Thank you for that. So Mark, you're the host of the podcast Humans 2.0. I was recently invited to participate. I cannot wait to listen. It's not up yet, right?
No, not yet.
Just let me know when it is and we'll share it. So tell us a little bit about yourself. So for the people who are listening and may not be familiar with you yet, what do you do? What's your background? And what inspired you to start this podcast? And of course, why is this different than your regular business podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I would start off by answering that question of, I'm a pretty young guy. I'm 21 years old. Live in the United States. My parents immigrated to this country a year before I was born. They came here not knowing the language, not really having any money. So when I was growing up, I became this very resourceful and crafty kid. And one of the ways that I used that is I went on the internet when I was 10, 11 years old, started learning from online courses, eventually started a YouTube channel around video games. And when I was like 13 years old, I had this YouTube channel that had like 35,000 subscribers. And this was like in 2010, 11. So like, this is a time before, there were people that had tens of millions of subscribers. And I remember the reaction that I had to get like, wait, you record videos of yourself and put them on the internet? Right? So it was like that kind of time. That led me into just kind of diving down more the internet. I ended up starting a Minecraft server at the age of 15 that went on to become the world's #1 Minecraft server. I became very, very financially successful. But at that same time, I started to ask different questions. So while all my friends were, sort of chasing college degrees to get like this 6-figure salary or like this job at this company, I was already at that point. So that kind of caused a little bit of strife in me, kind of set me down this path of kind of discovering like who I am, what I'm here to do, kind of take stock of myself from like a physical, emotional, and mental health perspective. And I just ended up starting my business as a sort of way to kind of help myself, battle through each day. And I ended up starting my podcast, Humans 2.0, as, not really any sort of a branding strategy or anything like that, but it's just like, hey man, like I need help in my own life. So I might as well, seek out the greatest minds in every single area, such as yourself, and learn from them in order to get the results in my own life. So I started my podcast in the middle of 2017 last year, and it's just totally taken off. It's gone off to completely different places. It's led me to different speaking events, getting more higher and higher up clients. A few months ago, it was on the global top 100 list, and that just kind of it's really just become something bigger than myself. So I really am just a normal person that's like trying to make the most out of life. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, those are some pretty great accomplishments at such a young age. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Wow,
I appreciate
congratulations.
it.
You may be able to give me some advice on my podcast. I may I can hit one of those lists.
Yeah. It's
That's
quite
awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So what has your podcast taught you so far? Like the experience, what's it been like?
Yeah. That's a good point. I would say on a meta level, by just doing the podcast, what I've really learned is that, Seth Godin and, Naveen Jain and all these people that, people look at sort of on a pedestal, whether they've made a certain amount of money or they've done a certain thing. Before starting the podcast, I thought that, these people were special and they don't have insecurities. They don't have fears. They don't have doubts. And just by like talking to these people and getting to know them and starting a relationship, I've really discovered that, they all have the same sorts of thoughts. But the main takeaway that I've really learned is that successful people, are not the ones that, their brains don't doubt them or anything like that. But what they do is they just take action despite those certain thoughts. They sort of treat their thoughts as just thoughts and not really part of who they are. So sort of like you would treat your children. So like if you have, a certain thought of like, hey, don't put out this piece of content because like people won't like it and you're going to embarrass yourself and this and that. But the real distinguishing factor is like just pushing it out there, just doing it anyway, and learning from those sorts of failures and mistakes. Whereas the people that, are not recorded in history as going down and doing anything, it's just because they don't try. And we really all have the same sorts of thoughts. So that for me was like a major, major fundamental shift. And that's really what I try to communicate across. And I think the success of my podcast has not come from me sitting as a host and being like, hey, I'm like a 21-year-old life coach, or like, I don't have any life experience. I don't know anything, but it's just my transparency and my vulnerability of like sharing my own thought process, having the guest share also their thought process. So the other person listening can get a peek inside of that. Right. And I think that's really the transformative time that we're living in here, especially with podcasts, because before, right, like you've got to think of it. If there's a famous person, like they're going to get like a 20-minute TV spot where they're just going to talk about their successes and like how to become successful and this and that. But when you really have a conversation or you're listening to a conversation that's maybe a little bit less formal, people can actually start to understand like, oh, this is what this person is actually like. And they're not sitting up here on this pedestal. So that to me has been like the biggest factor and has given me permission to really be able to do whatever it is I want. And I'm sure that's going to translate into the next field that I go into.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like sometimes we think other people who are more successful than ourselves don't have the same flaws or the same fears or the same thoughts. And then you realize, oh, wow, they do. They just, deal with it differently maybe, but it's there. What would you say has been like one of your most inspiring guests, not just inspiring for your audience, but for yourself too?
So I really thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with an individual named Naveen Jain. He's the founder of a moon company that's like going to space. He's also started a company called Viome that is in the healthcare industry that I believe has the potential to just disrupt everything we do in the healthcare system and really get people to not be as sick with chronic illness. And when I talked to him, it was just like such a magical experience. And when I left from the podcast interview, I just could not stop smiling for the rest of the day. And Naveen really made me believe that that we should go for our moonshot. And like you kind of hear this all the time of like, oh, all the limits are in your head. Like there's no such thing as limits. We kind of hear that all the time. But when I saw Naveen, a guy who came from India with no money, sometimes he was telling me that they didn't have food to eat. Sometimes they didn't even have a roof over their head. And what Naveen did is like when he was at that young of an age, he would just look up at the moon and he'd be like, I'm going to get there one day, right? Like he didn't have like this goal or like this sophisticated plan for it, but he just had like the burning in his belly to be able to move forward. And then when that opportunity to come to the United States presented itself, his mind was ready. So Naveen is like just not only doing amazing things in this world, but he's also just like, he's such a great, happy, peaceful guy. Like his mindset is number one. And like, although we didn't do the interview in person, like the same kind of energy, thought, like, I don't even know how to describe it. It went off to me. And like, I just left that day thinking like, I can literally do anything. And like, after I finished that interview, that's when like my podcast also started to level up. Cause then I was like, wait, so what else can I do? And then I started to reach out to more higher and higher profile guests and start to network with these people and get this person. So Naveen for me was a really, fundamental, inspiring shift for the podcast and also myself.
Wow. I'm going to have to listen to that interview, and I'm sure everybody listening here will want to. That sounds incredible.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I've experienced that too with some of the guests. So I think I know what you mean, but that was really awesome. Why the name of the podcast, and what is a human 2.0 according to you? I'm curious to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started the podcast, I came up with the name because, I just started to look at the way that humans are evolving and the way that we are evolving now with technology. And I noticed there's a fundamental shift. There's a fundamental evolution that's happening between us and technology. So on one part, I think a human 2.0 is somebody that uses technology, that incorporates technology in their lives and doesn't necessarily let the technology use them, right? On the other hand, I also think a humans 2.0 is really about the mindset of taking responsibility and not blaming your position in life on your circumstances, on your parents, on your government, on your race or your gender or anything like that. And you just start to understand this and put it in your own hands. So to me, a human 2.0 is somebody that understands this notion, takes responsibility, and then consistently takes action on the dreams that they want to project onto their reality while also using technology to make that happen. So that's the name for it. And I really think it's gonna evolve because, we're entering a day and an age where the concept of like augmenting human intelligence, the concept of starting to build in different, wearables that we extend, I think all of that is really just accelerating. And I don't even think it's begun really. And I think the future of what a human 2.0 is going to be like, it's going to be somebody that really does understand that we are human because of technology. Like we are human ever since we started to co-evolve with technology. Like once we started to, discover fire and cook better, that's when we started to get the cognitive resources to develop other things in our culture, like religion and government. And I really do think that this is just the beginning of it. And I really don't see technology and humans as something that are separate, but as sort of the same kind of thing. And we should use it to best help our lives and best fix the problems of the world.
100%. I do, however, have my reservations about certain technologies.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, like there are some things that are scary. Like, what do you think about those?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's like, I think technology is a double-edged sword, right? So it's like, where did technology go wrong? Just look at World War II, right? Like people were literally dropping nuclear bombs on other people, right? So I think what I've really understood is that it's a double-edged tool, and what it's really reliant on is the cognitive governing mind at play, right? So you can use technology to, let's say, create antibiotics, which has saved hundreds of millions of people's lives, or you can use it to, create a nuclear bomb, or you can use it for whatever. Like, for me, probably the scariest thing is, my agency works pretty heavy in the virtual reality industry. And like something that sort of scares me is the number one use of virtual reality right now, according to the most out there data, is pornography. Okay.
Whoa.
And yeah. And like, I don't believe that that's a very good thing for society. Right. But at the same time, excuse me, the US military is currently using virtual reality to treat veterans that have PTSD. So it's really like just this sort of tool. And ultimately I think what it comes down to, Caroline, is it's just, we have so much more power today. The average person, the average individual has so much more power, right? Like what I talk to people about their kind of like social media, everyone's on their phones. It's like, imagine if an alien came down to planet Earth and they just saw like all of these humans, like these hairless monkey things walking around, and everyone's got this, rectangle and everyone's just looking down. Everyone's just looking down while they're walking. And what they would see is like, they wouldn't call it an iPhone. They wouldn't call it a smartphone. They would call it like a magical rectangle. They would say, with this rectangle, the brain can look at whatever it is they want. So whether it's used to, do some form of instant gratification, or whether it's used as a form of escapism to kind of leave your life, all of those different avenues are valid, but it's just because we have more power today, and that wouldn't have been possible before. So it's like, as technology evolves, it's moving really fast. And a lot of the times we don't necessarily 100% understand and have the best case uses on how to use it in our own life. So that's where I think it's important for, people to, create content online about like, whether it's like how to live life, or like technology hygiene habits, or different things like that. Cause like this stuff is really new. So I think if you kind of understand that in mind, it's like, okay, it really kind of the same notion of what we talked about before of taking responsibility. It's also that same factor. And ultimately, I think whatever technology gets mainstream adopted is going to be a technology that helps us out in every aspect of our lives, if it's good enough, right?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting thought about the aliens and all of that. And
Oh yeah.
I think it's pretty spot on.
We'll see.
I mean, for me, it's technology is, I hope we never get to a point where technology controls us, or where we lose human touch. Because with virtual reality, I don't need to see my friends in person. I don't need to go to Paris. I don't need to. And some people are like, see that as a positive. Oh, look, you don't need to go to Paris. You can sit in your living room. For me, that's sad. Because I love traveling. I love going to places. I love getting on a plane and going to Paris, even if it's 13, 14 hours for me to get there. And even if I don't see my friends a whole lot, right, because we're all busy, it's nice to see them in person and all of those things. So for me, that's where it gets scary. Even Alexa, like I was doing another interview the other day, and we were talking about voice, Alexa and all this stuff. And my guest was Scott Stratton. He goes by Unmarketing. That's like his nickname online. And he's written several books. He's awesome. And so he said, "Oh, we haven't adopted Alexa either." And I was like, "Really?" And I said, I don't want to stop going to the supermarket, or doing all those little things that for me are a part of our daily lives. And I don't know, it's crazy, but that's kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah. And I think like ultimately at the end of the day, I think the main function of it is to, add more choices in our lives, right? Like not remove the choices, right? So I think
exactly
all those things you mentioned are awesome things, right? And you should be able to do whatever it is you want, whether you want to travel to Australia or this and that. But then, there's also like the other perspective of, let's say somebody can't afford, a plane ticket to Paris, or, and like, by the way, this stuff is going to be crazy. I mean, eventually what it'll come down to is it'll be, I don't know if this is going to scare you or not, but it will be indistinguishable from reality. It'll get to that point where whatever it is, like you put on a headset, you put on like a neuro chip, you put on glass, whatever it is.
I'm sure.
And you will be able to, hop into like Paris, and like it'll feel it, and you'll be able to taste everything and feel everything exactly as if you were there. And like some people might say that's sad. Some people might say, and it's like, ultimately it just gives us more choices, right? And I think that's what the human condition has been all about.
Mm.
I think it is really important to have conversations like all the things that you mentioned, like the potential downsides, right? Because like, have you heard of this TV show called Black Mirror?
I've heard of it. I haven't watched it yet. It's on my list, but yeah, I've
Oh
heard.
man.
I know, I've
Oh
heard.
man.
Don't tell me.
Yeah, it's like literally the one TV show that I watch, but it's like it projects out in the future. It's
Mm.
very realistic, very accurate, and it's like, okay, they take one technology and it's all about how can that go wrong in society. And the scary thing is that like they really do their research. The producers really do their homework to where
That's
like
good.
this stuff actually exists out there in the world. And like the main thing is like if we have conversations like this and we start building companies and startups around using technology for good, it's not going to be a black mirror. It's going to be a white mirror. So that's
Mm.
what I think kind of like this conscious future creating is all about, you know?
Mm-hmm. No, I know just what you mean. The thing is, as long as it's a choice, it's okay, you
Yeah.
know? Because, you know, at one point, Facebook was a choice, and then suddenly it became almost mandatory. Like, oh my God, if I'm not on Facebook, I'm missing everything. But then, you know, if you
Yeah.
look at the Matrix, everybody's like, oh, it's going to be like the movie The Matrix. They also didn't have a choice. You're born into this
Mm,
simulation. So I don't have a problem with people, you know, using virtual reality as long
yeah.
as, because everybody's doing it, suddenly flights to Paris are 100 times the price because since nobody's going. So I'm like, okay,
Mm.
um, interesting. Or, you know, they stop flying altogether. You know?
I see what your motives
But
are. I get it.
it's interesting. I mean, I'm not like paranoid or anything like that. I'm just, you know, happy with the fact that we can still enjoy those simple things of life. And I love technology either way. So that's how we're doing this interview right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, you know, if you rewind like 200 years before the airplane was invented, you know, people would say like, hey man, you got to get on that boat. Like, why wouldn't you take 3 weeks to get across? You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, I think this stuff is moving so fast.
I
You
know.
know, I think like, you know, for people to like project things out in the future, I just think it's like, what's coming in the next 5-10 years is, I think it's just going to crack us wide open. And I think at first it'll be a little bit discomforting.
Yeah.
But I think the truth and transparency that's coming from this is really going to benefit humanity in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure in the long term, you know, it's not going to be Terminator or The Matrix.
I hope so.
I hope so, but it might get close. Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah,
Who
exactly.
knows? So, who would be someone that you would love to have in your show that you haven't had yet, and why?
Gary Vaynerchuk.
Gary? Wow, you
Yeah.
haven't interviewed him yet?
No.
Oh.
I am. I'm working on it. But for me, the reason why I say that is, you know, kind of going back to, you know, when I told you when I was at that point in my life where I was starting to kind of take stock of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
A big push from that was just like randomly being on Facebook, and then a random Gary V video popped up.
Oh.
And at first my reaction was like, dude, who's this guy? Like, this guy is some, you know, sleazy salesman. And like what he was saying, I was like, dude, this guy just like wants my money, even though he wasn't even selling anything. And then like sort of like as the days and weeks went by, I actually discovered that, oh, this guy, Gary, he's actually trying to reveal me to myself. And he's
Mm.
actually trying to expose my own vulnerabilities and behaviors. And like once that happened, you know, just like a certain switch went on in my mind. And yeah, so I'm definitely going to interview Gary one day. It's going to be a great interview. I'm going to
What are
give
you gonna
him.
ask him? I'm curious.
So I want to ask him a couple of things. Just some things is like, I want to ask him like, when you were growing up and your dad was working at his liquor store and you didn't see him when you were a kid, like, do you know of any kind of sort of effect that had on you? Did that build your certain work ethic? And then at the same time, I want to ask him like, you know,
Mhm.
being on your journey for a while and just like having, speaking at so many events, getting all this data from so many people. Like I want to ask him about like the progression of his thoughts. Like if he architects them in his mind because of all the new data and all the new ideas that are coming in and the thoughts that he had before, like just looking at that from the outside, I think that's why he's a beast. He's always in the game. He's always immersing himself in
Mm.
people. Like he said before that he's consuming content, but like, I haven't really thought of any well thought out questions, but like those are two things. Those are two
Yeah.
ideas that are kind of in my head that I'm definitely going to ask him one day after I, give him a hug in New York, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if there's anyone out there that has like the best goodwill, if that's a right way to say that, it would be him. And I say that by experience. When I approached him for interviews, I think the first time I had to barter with him and get a few copies of his book before he would agree. But the
Nice.
second time, he didn't barter or ask me for anything. I just coordinated with his team. They were super nice, and the guy is just super super busy. So
Yeah.
that it's hard to get a spot, but if you hustle, if you show up, and if you and definitely just show him that you care, and it's not just to get stuff. And I know that's your
Yeah.
attitude already, so you're not going to have a problem with that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, he's pretty awesome. And what other projects do you have right now going on that you feel are going to inspire some people?
Yeah. So like I said, my parents are from Egypt, and I recently um, was one of the founding members of this nonprofit that is it's basically a nonprofit VC.
Mm-hmm.
So the main point of it is to start building sustainable businesses in Egypt for the people that
Nice.
don't really have much, but they have the work ethic, they have the desire to be able to do that. So we've been doing that. It's been a crazy ride, and we're really seeing some results. It's called Canoina Ventures, but I think just like I said, like I'm a 21-year-old kid. I think a lot of the reason why I have the opportunity that I have today is because, my parents made a conscious decision to, leave their life, leave their family, the language, the culture that they had in order for like this wishful thinking to potentially give us better opportunities down the road. And the fact that I'm a part of an organization that's now doing that in my original country while I'm still at the age of 21 is pretty damn inspiring in my opinion. And I think that's just the beginning, but it's like, one thing I'll say is, like, just like I said, I have no life experience, but despite that, and I had very severe social anxiety, but despite that, I launched a top 100 podcast with no experience, no life experience, no experience interviewing people, no experience with any kind of, social interactive skills. So it's like, like whether you think you don't have talent
Mm.
or, certain people don't believe in you or this and that, none of that stuff matters if you have your own back. So that's what I would say.
I love it. That is awesome.
Thank you.
What do you think made the difference for you then? When you started your podcast, you started from scratch, right? Without, having maybe a huge database of people or anything like that.
Yeah.
What do you think made it what it is? Like, was it the guests? Was it the questions? Was it your style? What was it?
Great question. So, like I said before, I think a big part of it is me not putting on a facade of like most of the podcast hosts that I see of like, like very, very shallow interviews that are just about kind of like transactional interviews, right? Like kind of
Mm,
what you said before about Gary. And especially now, since everybody has a podcast, that's sort
mm,
of what everyone is doing. So for me, it goes back to that authenticity. And the other thing is I would say is I do think the guests are important and they're going to keep building you.
Yeah.
But I do think ultimately it's important to, sort of build up your own podcast as its own titan, as its own platform. So you're not necessarily just asking for things, but you actually have something to give other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Right. And I would say the final thing that's really made a game changer in my podcast is over the last 6-7 months, I've really been using LinkedIn as a platform.
All right.
And I've really been using it for, making the sorts of micro videos from the podcast of like these short little audiograms. And really what I've discovered is that LinkedIn is such a underrated platform right now.
I know
that the amount of organic reach you can get is ridiculous. Like I've had videos hit, 500,000 views, which is significant for me.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. And like my average post gets tens of thousands of views. And, if 0.01% of somebody scrolling by or somebody watching the video clicks on my podcast and listens to it and then eventually subscribes, over time, if you're doing that every day, it builds up to be a beast. And then once you do that, people really start to become not fans, but people really start to become, dedicated to the platform. And then that's when they start telling their friends and their family about it.
Yes.
And then it kind of goes back to, I'm sure you've heard of, Kevin Kelly, Tim Ferriss's concept of 1,000 true fans.
Yes,
And
I
it's like,
have.
if you can get 1,000 people to just like genuinely enjoy what you're doing, they will market it for you. And that's really what I've discovered, and just kind of using LinkedIn as that sort of growth bridge.
Absolutely. Love it. Great advice. Personally, I've left my LinkedIn account a bit, unattended.
Mm-hmm.
And recently I did like 1 or 2 posts, not about my podcast, but about something else. And I'm like, wow, these people are still here. And I realized I had like 1,000 requests. And I'm, oh my God, all these people want to connect with me. Okay. So I think it is a great platform. And you're right, it is underrated. So all of you people listening, watching, get your butt on LinkedIn. Start using it, start networking with people over there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's like LinkedIn is so powerful because all the business people are on there, all the decision makers. At this point, like LinkedIn has just completely exploded not only my podcast, but also my business. And I'd say it's like where 80% of my business comes from now. Just of LinkedIn, it's really, really changed the game. I love
Absolutely.
it.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. So Mark, thank you so much for your time today. I had a great time with this interview.
This is my pleasure. This is so fun. Thank you so much.
I know. It was so much fun. And I think we will be talking again very soon. I'd love to catch up with you again, do another of these. And in the meantime, where can people find you? Where can people find your podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can find my podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. Just search Humans 2.0. And I'm very accessible. Just I'm primarily on LinkedIn and Instagram, Twitter, every social network. Look up my name, Mark Metry. Shoot me an email anytime. Very accessible. Caroline, thank you so much for having me on. And I just want to say, for anybody out there listening to Caroline's podcast, make sure you go to her iTunes. Make sure you leave her a review. She works very hard. I would really appreciate it, and I'm sure she would too.
Absolutely. Definitely would. So thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you, Mark, again for your time. And I think we'll also, hopefully we'll meet in the future, in the near future.
Absolutely.
In person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the best way to do it.
I'll talk to you soon, man. Thank you.